Hi, I'm Gerben.
Hi, I'm Jelle.
So Jelle, we all know and love normal APIs.
We all do.
We all do. We also know that there are some other languages than C#, .NET that have some more tiny API syntax.
Right.
But today you're going to tell us something about minimal APIs.
Right, yes I am. So I've been working in the field for like 8 years maybe. But you've been here slightly longer, not a stab at your age. This is just you have some more experience
As a
in the
developer,
field.
yeah.
So you must remember the introduction of MVC.
I do.
That was like
A long ago.
2007, I think.
Yeah.
So that was the next big step for Microsoft, and we know MVC. We were very happy with it. Maybe we're not so happy with it, but at least it's used quite often. And now Microsoft has introduced an alternative, and it's called Minimal API, where I think the biggest shift is in the amount of boilerplate code. So so what does if you have MVC, the C is for controller, and if we're typing controller, Control-C, Control-V is the most used button combination there is, because there's just a lot of boilerplate, which allows us to configure a lot, which is, we like that. But
you said it was an alternative. Is it something that's plugged on top of the normal ASP.NET framework, or is it something that's standalone?
Basically it's Microsoft likes to say it's from the ground up, but it uses some of the same underlying principles to get a very different feel as a developer. So the trade-offs are it's a lot simpler. It's a bit faster, but you have a lot less options and a lot less configuration that you have under your control. There's use cases for both, I think. The response to Minimal API hasn't been all that, enthusiastic. So I'm not saying that we should all switch every application to Minimal API, but there are some use cases for it, and I think it's important to introduce it. So the way that most people have seen Minimal APIs, basically in like examples, in quick demos. If I'll create a new project. And
what I'm curious about, do you know if, does Microsoft generate extra code so that it looks, if you go into the .NET assembly, do you see the same code that you would set up by hand, or is it really different?
Yes and no.
Okay.
That's a lot of stuff, yes. A tiny bit of stuff, no, it's completely different. So underwater, it's not that different, but there are some changes to make it work. So the great thing for people, clearly not you, is that you don't have to worry about it, what's the same or not, because you don't have to do as much. So if I type in Minimal API, there's not a project template specifically for that, but it does give me a suggestion. So I'm going to have that.
And is this the same on, for instance, when I create a project with the .NET CLI?
Yes.
Is there a simple switch, or?
Well, there we go. We have a simple switch here. If I do not uncheck this, I'm going to have an MVC application. But I want to uncheck this now. Well, as it says, I am using Minimal API. Let's create it, and quickly we'll see some differences with the. Thank you, Visual Studio. I have an update, and I am enjoying Visual Studio very much. We have a very easy and tiny application. So this is the example application. The weather forecast, you might remember this from other example applications, but I'm just gonna show that it can be even easier. So here's some code, the quickest hello world that I could create, and if I run this, it'll try to. I think it'll try to get me to run Swagger, which I haven't configured because I'm staying minimal. But if I go without the Swagger, then we can clearly see that despite the security risk, I get this beautiful website, and there's a hello Betatalks over there. Wow, what a great application we've built. So this is what most people have seen about minimal API, and
no, so the minimal demonstration on
yes,
on
this is, and of course people are going to say, this is just, this is a demo, this is for quick demos only, and there's a little tiny core of truth maybe to that, but it is actually not as minimal as this. I would say that minimal mostly refers to, well, let's say minimal effort, but you can make some enterprise-worthy applications with this if you know your use cases.
And if I look at the code, I also see some things missing, like namespaces and programs and mains. Is that new features of C# that we're seeing used here in combination with a new?
Correct. So this makes good that you add that. Of course, I'm working in a .NET 6 C#10 application. So all the new .NET 5, .NET 6, C#9, C#10 features that allow us to reduce the amount of boilerplate code, they are now implemented as well. So I have a 4-line app.
Yeah, that adds really to the minimal.
It adds to the minimal feel. Of course, I could specify that this is actually in a namespace in a program class, and that this is the static void main. Yep. But
it makes it more minimal.
This makes it more minimal, and I never tend to do that anymore as long as I'm running in these newer applications. So this is not something that we could use in production. In production, most of us now have an MVC application, and I think it's very interesting to show, let's say we have an MVC application already working. That's actually, well, still very demo-ish because I have other stuff to do. I'm not going to build a side production application, but it has a little more of a real feel.
Yep.
So just a quick tour. We have something that is a blog entry. You can have comments on that entry. You have a create comment model to send those new comments. And we have services. So we have a service to interact with those blog entries, and we have a service to interact with those comments. Basically, what we have in this project is the standard MC application.
Yeah, so there's a normal one with normal.
This is a normal one, except of course I am still using .NET 6. So basically, I have some global namespacing here. I'm using the auto program, stuff like that. But we're doing an MVC application. So I have a builder, I configure my dependency injection, I add some Swagger configuration, I'll do some other stuff, I map the controllers.
And then the controller mapping. Yeah, so then it will
and
find
I'll
the controllers.
And the controllers to find are here. We have a block entry controller that does some stuff, and we have a comment controller that does some stuff.
Yep. So I see also in your minimal API example, then the same builder, the same .NET library is called. So that's all the same.
Yes, that's all the same. So if you were actually kind of directing to that question earlier, yes, many things remain the same, and you don't have to learn an entirely new syntax. So if I just for demo purposes run this MVC application, then we get a Swagger. I'll get a bit, well, I like it big. Here we have, let's say, let's refer to our blog entries. We try it out. All right, I have retrieved all the blog entries on the site. It works. Of course, for demo purposes, I have configured an entire data strategy, and this is all coming from an actual database and not from in-memory stuff. So, we have a beautiful response, and I can also use, for example, these IDs to post comments, etc., etc. So, just to show, this MVC application works.
Yeah, so there will be your normal MVC application with a controller and mapped in the startup.
But if I stop running the MVC application, we can see that this is, for such a tiny API, it's, well, I've tried to keep it as small as possible so as not to, if I start inflating it, then it would be an unfair comparison. But there is some boilerplate code here. We have to, use some attributes. There's a lot of
dependency injection going on.
Yep,
Constructor.
and there are separate controllers for each. So in minimal API, we would do this differently. So if I switch my startup project, and I'll go to the actual minimal API, we can see that there's a program file here as well.
Yep.
But there's no controllers folder. So you can also see, spoilers for like 5 minutes from now, a program with extensions, but I'll show that later. So here we have a program, and at first glance, you might be thinking, that's still quite a large file.
But the setup, I mean, the first few files also adding the dependency injection and adding Swagger, that's just the same.
Mostly the same. There might be some different things that you're allowed to configure or that you would be interested in configuring, but mostly it's the same type of setup. But after we do all this configuration and Swagger setup and stuff, we get to something new, and that's where we start mapping routes. And what we have here is basically the same methods. We have 4 of them that we saw earlier in the controllers, but now we just declare them immediately here. It's also the same code, so it works the same, and I can use my dependency injection just
like normal, yeah.
Configure it immediately because I configured it above.
Yeah, so these are all anonymous Lambda expressions in line.
Correct.
I can understand if you have a bigger project, then you can move your functions to just normal CS file and then map them in here, so you get a bit of more overview.
Yes, so if your methods would get bigger, you could set them somewhere else, etc., to make sure, because as you can see, for 4 files, we're already nearing the 100 lines. Yep. If you have a bigger API, this is not really readable or maintainable. But I think that's also immediately the use case. If you have a small API and you're working with a microservice approach, for example, then this would be a lot easier on the developer than having to configure different controllers and repeating the same, repeating the same boilerplate code again and again.
And what about things like authorization attributes? I want to authorize this method or what?
Yes, so there is ways to configure that, and there are also ways to configure, because as you can see here, you can have some simple stuff that you want to use from whatever the users input in the URL, or you can do some other stuff. But when you start doing it more, something more complex, you'll have to use some different approaches. Some of them are a bit harder to configure, some of them are easier. Authentication is not that much harder than for an MVC application, but you will need to find that approach. So it's well documented, so that helps. There are some tiny problem areas where a minimal API just won't be able to deliver the same kind of functionality as an MVC application. Usually, you already know when you start up whether something is too complex for a minimal API anyway, because you have certain very specific wishes and you need to be able to turn all the knobs explicitly. That's when you would go to an MVC application.
But doesn't this minimal API help you to, for instance, authentication, authorization, to push it more forward? I mean, you now do not have the possibility to put it in your controls, attributes, etc. You have to push it in the startup section. Yeah. So it could even help you at least to separate the plumbing from the actual implementation.
I like the way you think.
But?
Well, there's no but. I think it could help you, but there's different pitfalls for MVC and for a minimal API. So I think it is it's a preference thing, but also I think it's as I said at the start, it's an alternative. So an alternative should never be bad unless it's really, really complex to learn, and a minimal API is not really complex to learn. So just to quickly show, it still works. We've got the same API working, but now from the minimal API approach, and last time I tried out the blog entry get all, so let's just show that still works.
Still the same data as there in memory.
It's yes, okay, fine. You caught me out. It's an in-memory database. It works. It's been configured differently. Now, as you said, it is kind of maybe this is not the perfect approach for all people, but they still think, well, I would like to reduce my boilerplate code, which is why I prepared a special cake in the oven of using less code. So just copying it over to make it all pretty like. So this is an actual minimal API because I only have 7 lines of code. I could make even less if I remove the line break there. And this still works, and I'm doing all the same stuff that I was doing before with configuring all the routes because I've used extension methods.
Yep.
And this is something that Microsoft actually actively encourages.
Okay.
Start using extension methods to make the app configurable in different files. So no controllers, no boilerplate code, but if I want to map the routes, then I can just have an extension method on my web application where I map the routes in a different file.
Yeah, cool.
And that cleans up nicely. You can decide your entire strategy. You don't have to put it in separate controllers. You can put it all in the same file. You can use a different file for each method, whatever your personal preference is. And this still works. So if I run it now, then I'll get the same results as
you can separate out, so you can make different extension methods for different parts of your API.
Yes, you can basically, instead of having to follow a very rigid scheme, you can create your own very rigid scheme, but at least then it fully follows your own needs and preferences. So the question that immediately arises, when would you use minimal API? Because that's what a lot of people are saying. I don't think I'll ever use it. I'm going to stick with MVC, which I think is fine, but I can see some definite use cases for this. I don't know if you have the same reaction as many others.
What I see is I think that it could help you, I would say force, but help you to think in smaller sections, smaller building blocks for your application. And it will help you to more compose APIs instead of making just one big.
I think was something sorely missing from the .NET landscape, where you have all these even older than MVC ways of creating APIs. You have MVC, which is a very great service, but it was lacking this kind of style.
Yeah, and on the other hand, you have functions. You have function serverless, which is
and
this is something that maybe fits in between.
Yes. Of course, there are some downsides to minimal APIs where you lack some configurability or options, but as a final thumbs up for minimal, it is slightly faster than the average MVC application, especially because you tend to build your APIs smaller, so you
build them leaner, and so it's more in the mindset and how you use minimal APIs.
But also because of the underlying boilerlessness.
Boilerlessness. Yeah.
That's the word now.
Really cool.
So that's the minimal demo.
Yeah,
I'd say
that is a good demo, and nice to see how you port from MVC to minimal API. And
so these you can look up these applications on my GitHub. It's really easy to convert, especially if you have a very tiny application. But those are the usual use cases. If you have maybe 5 endpoints, why write all these controllers? Why not just keep it simple?
Okay. Thank you very much. I learned a lot about minimal APIs, and thank you very much.
All right. See you guys soon.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.